in approaches to the defending the faith, I basically try to take some texts that most of us haven't read, Luigi Giussani, some others, Norris Clark, and work through what I find to be like really good ways to even talk about what does it mean that man has a religious orientation toward God? How do you appeal to that? What is the philosophy? How do we actually speak about God philosophically? So I'm kind of working through basics of the faith, but then we end with reading 3 weeks of that 10-week course is just reading Miracles by C.S. Lewis. And so what you're doing there is kind of like here now we're sitting and in the kind of the lessons of the master, and we're watching how he defends the faith. So it's not just what's the argument of the book. It's look at all these little things Lewis is doing to his audience and to his readers. And so there's an element of both I want to give in that class a deep sense of like how to approach defending the faith, both as a whole project, as a whole person, the faith as a whole person, how to approach persuasion in a way that fixes something in you, but then how to turn that into rhetoric that you can then communicate to others in a way that appeals to their whole person. So, and that's the class coming up. After that, I think it's philosophy for theology. So we have a lot of just, as you know, Nathan, we have Ryan Hurd and Michael Lynch, and we have these great professors whose knowledge of the kind of theological vernacular of the tradition and the philosophical density in it is really, really fine-grained and detailed. And I suppose that philosophy for theology, I play the role of kind of wetting the whistle for all of that. A philosophy for theology is that 100,000 foot up perspective class where you read a little bit of metaphysics, a little bit of epistemology, a little bit of philosophical anthropology, a little bit of ethics, and you're trying to see how do all the big pieces, metaphysics, epistemology, human, the study of the human, that sort of thing, how do all of those pieces really fit together? And so in a sense, what you're trying to do is it's not really just then the communication of information, of course, but then also communicating a kind of style of mind. And so what you're also doing in a class like that is kind of just throwing categories at people so that it's like, oh, think of it this way, look at it that way. And so your mind begins to get a little more elastic so that when you go into those other courses, you've started with the smaller weights, you might say, before you go off to the advanced herd. Beyond that, let's see here. I teach philosophy as a way of life. That's a kind of continuity of philosophy for theology. Philosophy as a way of life is much more looking at philosophy not as merely a set of content, but as a style of practice. That the philosophical gaze, the philosophical style of being is just that. It's a style of being. It's a way of being oriented to the world, and that is not just then motivated by content, but requires certain kinds of practical engagements. And I go through some of those practical engagements, but I'm also looking at the way philosophy as a way of life, that whole sense of philosophy has been conceived of throughout time. And so there's both kind of a practical, but also a chronological dimension to the class. How did the Stoics and the Epicureans imagine philosophy as a whole project? But what's fun about doing that is then you can spend a whole week, we spend in that class a whole week on Jesus and Paul. Jesus now thought of within the history of philosophy. Paul now thought of within the history of philosophy, not just as staters of facts, but as whole ways of capturing reality in a life lived and that sort of thing. So that's the one course. And then finally, I think I'll be doing this maybe it's every summer. I'm doing it right now. I'm in the middle of it. I teach a philosophy of modernity course, and that's really where I developed this claim I just made. Modernity is the simultaneous global renegotiation of all human custom. In that class, what we're doing is just working through some classic writers of the modern period, interpreters and theorists of modernity, to say, hey, what is this thing? How does technology, politics, the internet, secularism, find all the things? How do all those pieces, you spend a week kind of on each of those pieces and try to feel in a sense how they all fit together to create this singular condition.